everyone. Welcome to another episode of Powerful Teaching with Dr. Blades. Today, we are talking to Kara Guiff of Guiff's Goodies for Educators. Hey, Kara.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining. How are you doing today?
I am great and pumped and excited about talking with you.
I know, it's good to see you. This is maybe my second time seeing you, but my third time talking to you. I really want to let everyone know how we met. Do you remember how we met?
I do. I invited you to speak at a summit that I was doing. And so far, we've not been able to make that happen. So I think it was like right at the beginning when everything shut down for COVID. I did my first summit last spring. So then I was so excited when I got your invitation because I was like, yay, we're going to get to connect and make something work. So.
Yeah, I was hurt that I couldn't participate in your summit at the time, but here we are now. So Kara and I met during the pandemic last year. Everyone was moving their programs online and she had a great program going on. So she reached out to me. So we are pandemic virtual friends. We are yet to meet in person, but I'm excited that we do have this opportunity to work together. So yeah. Kara, why don't you share with everyone a little bit about your background in education and what you're doing now?
Okay. So I am 5 weeks from completing year 31. So I'm like, whoo, I hate saying it out loud because it ages me. And I'm like, I don't look like I've been around that long, right?
You do not.
So my first 10 years, I taught resource in a K-6 environment. And then I taught junior high in the same school system for the next 19 years. And so I spent 29 and a half years in the same school corporation. And I loved what I was doing, but it was becoming very overwhelming. And I was so thankful that God spoke to me, you need to find something else. I have a different call for you right before the pandemic. So in January, after 29 and a half years in, I switched to a position where I now teach in a virtual school. And so I switched in January before everybody had to automatically do that in March. So that was a huge blessing. Yeah, huge blessing for me. And so I'm working with alternative students in Indiana, and our online school caters towards students who struggle. So about half of them are on IEPs. So they needed a new special education teacher to carry some of that caseload. So I do that. And then our other students are either mental health or physical health or struggle due to other reasons that they don't qualify for IEP. And so our strength is getting you back on track and ready to graduate on time. So we do take junior high students to try to get them through their gap before they start high school. And if they're in high school, we work individually with you to get you back in credit recovery mode and back on track for graduation. And we also are the only school, and I'm really proud, in Indiana that will take expelled students, the only public school. So there's not very many options for kids when they make one of those horrible mistakes on that list where expulsion is the only option a school has. And in the state of Indiana, physical schools, they won't take you. Most of the onlines won't either. So if you're listening and you're in Indiana, we are White's junior, senior high CAR program. And if you look that up, you'll find us. And everybody always needs more resources for struggling students. So.
Wow, that sounds like some tremendous work that you all are doing. And you guys were just a little bit ahead of the curve, or a lot ahead of the curve, because everything that you mentioned are issues that I see cropping up all around the country, that some schools didn't anticipate that they would have these problems because they didn't anticipate that they would have to teach virtually. So these are new situations for a lot of people.
Yeah, it is. And we actually, our numbers skyrocketed because we were a school that knew how to do virtual. So when schools were virtual, or you chose to have your kid virtual, it didn't work real smoothly. It was more like regular in-person school absentee work rather than work created for a virtual environment. And so I'm really proud of what our team, and and what our students have done and accomplished over that time. And then also I do professional development through my business with Ladies for Education. And I help teachers save time without sacrificing effectiveness. And so I've been doing that for about 5 years now.
Saving time without sacrificing effectiveness. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So my favorite thing in the world to teach is how to do paperwork using Google Workspace, it's called now. Oh, it cracks me up every time I mention it because I've been using Google probably 4 years now. And in that time, it's gone from Google Apps for Education, and then it was G Suite, and now it's Google Workspace. It's like, are you trying to just confuse it? It cracks me up how often they change, but it's Google. It's all the same Google. We just have a different name for it. And when about 3 years ago, I was so overwhelmed with the amount of time I was spending on things at school that I didn't feel like were what I should be spending my time on. So I took about 6 weeks and I tracked everything that I did on a paper, how much time I spent everywhere. And what I found was that I was spending about 56% of my work time on paperwork. And I was like, that is just way too much. And I know that most special educators are in that same boat. It's either that or you're doing it at midnight at your house when the rest of the house is in bed. And so I was like, there's got to be a way to streamline this, and there's got to be a way to get more time with my kids. Like, I need to be teaching my students, but the reality of what happens is, as a special educator, you got stuck doing the paperwork because that's a have to. And then your IAs are doing more of the instruction, if you're lucky to have IAs, or your kids are you give them independent work because you've got to get your paperwork done and you've got to survive. And I had decided I'm not martyring myself for my job anymore. And so that's how I initially was taking that on, was just, I would plan a day a week and give my kids independent work so that I could do the work that I was responsible to do. And so then I was like, okay, there's got to be a way to use Google to do this, because about a year I had been using Google. And so that summer I created systems of flow using Google Forms, Google Spreadsheets, recurring email. Every tool I could find. And the next grading period, when I went back to school, I tracked again what I spent on paperwork, and I cut my time by 60%.
Oh, wow.
Actually 63. Yeah. I was like, I didn't expect it to be that high. And I was like, oh my goodness. And so now I've taught this work to thousands of teachers, and overwhelmingly they say 50% or more. But I tell people, if you take on these strategies, you will save between 30 and 60% of the time you spend on paperwork. And it's phenomenal to get that back, to either pour into your kids or pull into your hobbies. Oh, wait, what are those for teachers, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, obviously you want more time for your students, but especially now, teachers really need more time for themselves. I mean, we always did, but this year in particular, we need that more than ever. So
Yeah.
I know that the strategies that you're going to share at the upcoming Teach to Empower conference will be very helpful to all of our attendees. But before we talk about those strategies, let's talk about you starting your business and how you really manage that business, providing professional development to other teachers, and you're still a teacher.
Yeah. Whew. You don't see both my heads here, right? So really about 5 years ago, I went to a conference that was called Celebrating and Elevating Teachers. It was called Celebrating and Elevating Teachers. And the whole purpose of that conference was to make teachers feel good. And it did. I left feeling so amazing and wonderful and like respected and cared for, which is not always what happens to you as an educator. There's more piled on and nobody recognizes what you did. And so I was like, I want to leave this feeling with other teachers too. And so I just felt the Lord calling me to do professional development. And so in Indiana, we were very lucky for about 7 years, we had our Department of Education sponsored summer tech conferences. And so you could go to conferences all over the state of Indiana, and from $50 to free, you could attend these amazing professional development days where we brought in speakers from around the world because the Department of Education was funding the speakers. And so all the corporation was doing was planning it, putting it together. They didn't have to come up with the money. So they were basically to be nonprofit for the organization. And so most of them were really free. Sometimes you paid something if they had a really fancy lunch catered in or something like that. And so I looked that summer for opportunities to present at those and started presenting at those conferences. I just spent my summer traveling around Indiana and presenting at conferences and fell in love with it. I am in my happy place when I am teaching teachers. It gives me that joy I used to feel when I was in front of my classroom teaching. I still like teaching my students, but I know like this is what I was put on this earth to do, is to help teachers figure it out quicker than the 25 plus years it took me to figure these things out and to streamline. And especially in special education, what happens is you attend conferences and hope to get a good idea, because there are very few sessions, few conferences that are dedicated to helping the special educators.
No, I completely agree. And that is why when I started putting this together, I really wanted Teach to Empower to stand out. And that's why the majority of our speakers, even though they do provide professional development like you, they have businesses and brands, but the majority of them are still in the classroom or in the building in some position, because I think it's really important to hear from your peers.
Yes. And it makes, when I get feedback from presenting, that's one of the biggest feedbacks that I get is it's so real because you know us, because you're still doing this. And so I don't plan to quit teaching. Maybe at some point I'll go part-time depending on how busy the business gets. But right now I'm just happy with it being supplemental and that I got to do the two things I love most in the world.
Yeah, and so the second thing, why I knew I wanted you to be a member of our speaking staff, if you will, is because there are never enough sessions specifically aimed for special education educators. And I figured, I hadn't spoken to anyone, I did no research on this. I just figured if there's a lack of quality PD for special education educators in our in-person setting, imagine what must be going on now virtually. And since you were my new COVID virtual pandemic special education teacher friend, I said, she has to come on board. She has to be a speaker for this conference.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you took that opportunity, because it's a needed thing, that's for sure. And when I flipped in the pandemic, like that was worse to me than flipping my classroom instruction, because I'd already switched school. But I was like, oh my gosh, this is how I spend my summer. I mean, it wasn't big money, but you got paid like $50 here, $50 there for these presentations. And so I was like, oh my gosh, they're all closed down now. What am I going to do? And how am I going to get that love? And so I just quickly flipped to online training, and I started creating online courses and doing in-person virtual training, much less. People don't seem to, or administrators, I guess, like they're like more worried about how are we going to do a virtual PD, so it's funny. But yeah, I flipped it quickly. But what I know is that I love talking to people better. Last Saturday, I got to present at an online virtual conference, and it was live. It wasn't pre-recorded. And at the end of the day, I was so tired, but I told my husband, I said, I had so much fun with real people again. So hopefully someday we can be in person.
Energy that you get from your audience, it's the same energy that you get from your students.
Yes.
In the classroom, and it really fuels you.
Yes. And my encouragement to everyone watching is if you attend a PD session where you can put your camera on, please put it on. Nobody cares what your hair looks like, if your makeup's on. Like, you can't even hardly see that on the camera. Like, we're so critical of ourselves. I was just laughing with Marquita before we started because she was taking care of something. And so I was just staring at myself in the camera. And I'm like, oh no, the longer I sit here and look, the worse I look, right? Because that's how we are. But honestly, it is so meaningful to the presenter to see a face. So please be the face, even if everybody else turns that camera off. It's so meaningful. I mean, if you're teaching virtually, you know what I mean, because you're fighting it with your students.
Yes.
And I teach at little spots all day because nobody wants to have, I finally convinced them to put their picture as their profile pic, which is somewhat helpful, but wow, it's hard.
So, Kara, why don't you share just a tiny bit of some of the strategies that you're going to be presenting during your Teach to Empower conference?
Yeah, I am really excited about my session. It's a brand new session that I haven't done before, but it's not a brand new thing. I've just never taught on it before. And when you reached out to me, I was like, this is the time to do it. So I have created a interactive way to do transition assessment. If you're secondary and you're having to do transition assessment, it is so boring. like talking to the kids engages you some because you're trying to find out, what's your plans for the future? Do you want to have a job? What careers are you interested in? What chores do you do at home? And all these other questions you have to ask for. If you're not familiar, we have to at age 14, most states, some states have a little bit different. It might go by grade level instead of age. In Indiana, it's 14 and up. And you have to assess their independent living skills, their education skills, and their future job interest. And you have to report on this at each IEP. And the kids think the questions are kind of ridiculous. And if you try to get them to do them independently, it's not good. So for me, I end up interviewing everybody. And one, I like it because I really get to know the kids. But two, it's hugely time consuming and not engaging at all for the kid. It's just not. So I was like, what can I do to help that? And so I've created kind of a hybrid hyperdoc document where they take it with them almost like they can have it forever. So like if they are interested in a certain career, then I have them find a video on that career and they put this stuff all into this hyperdoc in the end so that they just don't forget about it after we ask the questions either. And because I know myself, and I'm sure I'm not the only special education teacher out there who feels like the transition assessment is just one more thing that we're asked to do. It's one more box I'm checking. And honestly, for years, that's what it was to me. I was like, okay, I got to check my boxes there. I did that. Great, I'm done. But it wasn't meaningful to the student. We would talk about it in the case conference. And then 1 year later, we'd talk about it again because I had to check the boxes again, right? I'm sure you've been there. So now this is a more like they have access to it all the time. It's a shared document. And we might pull it out during math or English, or if we have an extra 10 minutes here and just do another little piece of it. And so it's ongoing instead of sliding it in and trying to find time for it the week before I have to have the conference. And so it's saving me time and it's getting me better information and a clearer picture. Like I go into these conferences and the student and I both are on the same page. They remember doing it. Sometimes I would say, do you remember when we had these questions? And the kids would go, I don't know what you're talking about. And I'm like, we did this it was 3 days ago. Like, how do you not know? So then I'm like, everybody's looking at me like, really, are you making up those answers? So with this new way of doing this, it's much more interactive. And I actually call it the anti-boring transition assessment. So.
Well, it sounds also like the students are going to learn some transferable skills in the process of putting this together for you. Definitely. That they can now take into other situations.
Yes, you are so right. Because one thing I find often with struggling learners, especially if they're learning in an online, whether they're in person or virtual, they're doing a lot of stuff on the computer almost anywhere these days. And the struggling students are lacking the tech skills to get that level of work done, because they're working so hard just to make sure they read the passage right, understood it, do the question. The creative piece falls off, and it's also the first piece that's modified for them. So if a teacher has a project and they're having a lot of difficulty, they'll say, well, then don't worry about these creative tech things we're doing. And I'm like, oh, but that's the part they need to do.
Yes.
So this gives them some of those tech skills, you're right. And they're excited to learn how to do things and be able to use them when they do their other classwork.
And there's a way to accommodate without sacrificing the essential skills that students really need.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to learning this technique that you have created. I'm pretty sure it's something, though, that other teachers could probably just pick up and use with any student.
Oh yeah, you could do it. If you're teaching secondary, you should be having these conversations. Like, the law shouldn't tell us we have to have these conversations with kids. It's not just the guidance counselor's job to help make sure somebody has a career path they're trying to follow. And some of them won't even talk to the guidance counselor. And so you could be sitting in your English class, and as part of a project, you just add one piece of this hyperdoc for them to reflect on their future about something. And maybe you're the one that sparks that interest in them. Maybe you're the one that finds out they have no idea and they don't even know how to research careers, because we get so many kids, and especially since COVID, they are just going through the motions of school.
Yeah.
If they're going through the motions of school. So many kids are not being successful at all. They're overwhelmed. They're feeling depressed. They're feeling like they have no control over anything. But then you ask them to think about their future or what they love, and you might get them engaged in English or math or science because you took that time to do that. I did something with my kids last week, because since spring break, they've been very like, I just don't like, can't we just end the year, spring break-itis or whatever it is that everybody gets. So for their attendance engagement questionnaire, I found a video called 7 Ways to Make Sure You Have a Miserable Life. And so as you watch it, you're going like, I don't want to be that person, right? But so if you want, like, one of them is, if you want to be miserable, make sure your device is in front of your face at all times. And they show the kid like sitting at the breakfast table and trying to get into the car and knocking into the door. And then one of them is like, never put anything away. Just leave it on the floor where it lands, and lay in your bed all day if you're home. Certainly don't sit in the living room where the other people are. I don't know how the guy does it, but he says everything without sounding sarcastic. Like, he sounds like he really wants to teach you this. It's amazing. But obviously anybody watching it picks up on, oh yeah, I don't want to be miserable. And so at the end, he switches it into, but guess what? The opposite of that is how you become happy. And so I asked my kids to watch that and just tell me, did they find any part of that they identified with? And 2, what could they change going forward to make the happy meter bigger than the miserable? And oh my gosh, it was heartbreaking. Like, some of the kids I didn't even know, like they were feeling like this. And they said, I've done every one of those things in the last year. Like, I'm going to start right now, picking up my room or whatever. And so the conversations that come from those kind of activities, the life skills are the things that our kids need more than anything. And it's hard because I know that test is still looming in Indiana. It did not get canceled this year. Oh. But you know what? We have the ability to say, so what? We have to administer the test. We have to prepare the kids to our best for the test to the best of our ability. But if we have kids who are angry and miserable and depressed sitting there taking the test, what does it matter that I taught them the material? It doesn't in the end, because their score is going to tank. But maybe I could make this difference right now in this other way. And one thing I've been working on is changing my language, because we call those things the soft skills. Mm-hmm. And I think that makes them sound so unimportant.
Right.
And those soft skills, they're the hard skills. And they're the most important things that we need to teach our kids. So there's my little spiel on that.
Well, Kara, I'm going to put the link to that video in the description of this video because I am sure that other teachers would love to share it with their students, and hopefully they'll get some of the same results that you got. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. This was a great conversation. Let everyone know how they can find you, where they can find you, how they can find you.
Yeah, so one place you can find me is on Facebook. If you look for the group Thriving in SPED, you will find me. And if you can pop a link into your notes or whatever, that would be perfect. And you do not have to be a special education to be in that group. I have tons of people who are not special ed. And I was like, really? And when I talk to them, they're like, well, yeah, because if it's good for yours, it's good for mine. And in the end, we all teach special ed. No matter what we teach anymore, we all do. So
very true. Yeah.
So you are welcome to pop in there, whether you teach special ed, gen ed, whatever you do. And then also you can follow me on Twitter. I am at Kara Guiff. And then my email is really long, so I'll just let Marquita put it in it's the name of my business. I made it way too long. So it's okay. So you can just put that in the notes too.
I'll put it in the notes. It is a long email address. I always copy and paste it because I'm just so scared.
Me too. I was like, what was I thinking when I did that? But whatever.
Okay, because I get so many comments of people messaging me saying, do you know that you're spelling power wrong? And I'm like,
You're like, duh.
It's an acronym.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. Like they thought that poor woman doesn't know how to spell, right?
Right. Well, thank you again, Kara. I can't wait until the conference. For those of you who are watching, if you haven't registered yet, go to powerfulteaching.com and register for the Teach to Empower, spelled correctly, conference. You're going to see Kara's session as well as a whole lot of other sessions that are taught to you by your highly qualified teacher peers. Professional development for teachers by teachers. Thank you for joining, and I'll see you in the next episode of Powerful Teaching with Dr. Blades.
Thanks, Marquita.